Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's get started with Week 18's Word Nerd Wednesday. Now, tomorrow, on Third Age Thursday, I'll be reading more in the appendices about Durin's folk. Last week, we looked at a word closely connected with them, mithril. This week, let's look at another word connected to the dwarves, especially Thorin and his immediate ancestors. The great white gem which the dwarves had found beneath the roots of the mountain, the heart of the mountain, the Arkenstone of Thrain. We read in The Hobbit that it was like a globe with 1,000 facets. It shone like silver in the firelight, like water in the sun, like snow under the stars, like rain upon the moon. Later on, when Bilbo finds it, we read it was the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain. So Bilbo guessed from Thorin's description. But indeed, there could not be two such gems, even in so marvelous a hoard, even in all the world. Ever as he climbed, the same white gleam had shone before him and drawn his feet towards it. Slowly it grew to a little globe of pallid light. Now, as he came near, it was tinged with a flickering sparkle of many colors at the surface, reflected and splintered from the wavering light of his torch. At last he looked down upon it, and he caught his breath. The great jewel shone before his feet of its own inner light, and yet, cut and fashioned by the dwarves who had dug it from the heart of the mountain long ago, it took all light that fell upon it and changed it into 10,000 sparks of white radiance, shot with glints of the rainbow. And some of that description, especially the idea that it shone of its own inner light, have led folks to wonder if the Arkenstone is a Silmaril, specifically the one that accompanied Maedhros as he hurled himself into a fiery chasm. That question is closely tied to the word nerdery behind Arkenstone, which I'm finally getting to, I promise. Going to the Ring of Words, we read that the name of the Arkenstone is one of many extinct Old English words which Tolkien revived, though he did not simply lift Old English words from their context, but fitted them into their new surroundings by giving them modernized spellings. Of course, Tolkien didn't stop there, did he? Oh no. Tolkien would ensure that these modern spellings, quote, reflect the patterns of change and pronunciation which can be seen in those words which did survive into modern English, so that they have linguistic authenticity, representing the spellings that the extinct words would have had if they had survived in continuous use through the centuries, end quote. Because of course that's what Tolkien would do. So what's the Old English word that Tolkien used as the basis for the modern English word Arkenstone? Well, the Old English word was eorcnanstan, and it means precious stone. The eorcnan, meaning precious, and stan, not surprisingly, is stone. The authors of the Ring of Words point to a 10th century manuscript known as the Rushworth Gospels, where that same word, eorcnanstan, is used in the biblical instruction, do not cast your pearls before swine, to represent pearls. Now, the Ring of Words goes on to explain the transition to the modernized form Arkenstone, so eorcnanstan to Arkenstone, by comparing it to a word that has survived into modern English, and it's the word hearken. Now, they say that Tolkien rather liked the spelling hearken, H-A-R-K-E-N, as opposed to H-E-A-R-K-E-N. And the OED says that that spelling is more regular and of earlier standing. That word hearken, which is just like the Arken part of Arkenstone, comes from the Old English eorcnian, and the Ring of Words explains that the last three letters, I-A-N, are an inflectional ending that regularly disappears before modern times, just as the A-N ending of eorcnan would have done. So you go from, in this case, from eorcnian to hearken, just as you would go from eorcnanstan to Arkenstone. They even explain the EOR to AR transition, that's Eor to R, as a regular transition from Old English to modern English, and thus eorcnanstan becomes Arkenstone. Now, where this gets really interesting is that at the time that Tolkien was writing The Hobbit, the early to mid-1930s, he was also working on an Old English version of the Annals of Valinor. Now, that's in The Shaping of Middle-earth, Volume 4 of the History of Middle-earth, and there's not a whole lot there, but there is one thing that we do discover. The Silmarils are called eorclanstanas, precious stones. And that leads the authors of the Ring of Words to conclude that although the Arkenstone has no obvious link to the wider history or mythology of Middle-earth, its name does make a hidden connection the tales of the elder days. Now, in the history of The Hobbit, John Ratliff suggests that Tolkien wanted to make this hidden connection, but that the connection doesn't establish that they're the same jewel. And I love the way that Ratliff puts this. And Sean and I talked about this way back in episode 43 of the Prancing Pony podcast. Ratliff says, by avoiding the use of the word Silmaril, and instead using the ingenious and agreeable synonym Arkenstone, eorcnanstan, Tolkien got to draw on his rich homebrew mythology, which by the early 1930s had developed a remarkable depth and sophistication, without worrying what the effect of his new story would be on that mythology. In other words, Tolkien was using his own mythology as a source of inspiration, sort of like how the king of the woodland realm in The Hobbit is quite clearly modeled after Thingol in the First Age, but it isn't really Thingol. Well, an Arkenstone isn't a Silmaril, but the Silmarils certainly inspired the Arkenstone. But folks, that's it for Arkenstone and eorcnanstan, and for today's Word Nerd Wednesday. But come back next week as we wander the wide, wild, wonderful world of words weekly on Wednesdays. And if there's a word you want to know more about, please let me know by emailing barnaman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and a whole lot more. And finally, join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Third Age Thursday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.